Well, good afternoon. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. It's particularly gratifying that on an afternoon when I am planning to share some of the aspects of my research that focus on community building, that so many people from this community have come out to participate. I hope it'll be a relatively short talk and a lively conversation, but I'll have to say right off the bat that one of the occupational hazards of doing the kind of research that I've been doing for the last 5 years or so is that it's really easy to talk about it and talk about it forever. So I'm going to try to lay out some of the methodological and substantive issues that have come to the fore over these last years, and then leave ample time, I hope, for some questions and comments. And since I am new to this community, I thought it might be helpful to elaborate a little bit more on my orientation as a sociologist. And as Dean said, my primary training and much of my teaching and scholarly work has been focused in the areas of gender and organizational sociology, and often in the places where they intersect. My recent empirical work, though, is really solidly grounded in the sociology of bodies. And this is a subfield in the discipline that certainly draws on critical theory in gender and race and sexuality, particularly in regard to the social construction of bodies and experiences of embodiment. But sociology of bodies delves ever more deeply, and the theories in this area are just amazingly exciting, ever more deeply into the realm of social practice and human agency. To put it sort of in layperson's terms, how and why we do what we do in the bodies we inhabit, within structures of power and among other embodied individuals. So it's complex, it's exciting, it sort of, in many ways, sort of reunites mind and body. It gets us away from the sort of Cartesian dualism that really, I think, hampered sociological analysis for many years, and particularly in the 20th century. So what I'd like to share with you today is in part a trajectory to give you a sense of my work by linking together two research projects, one that is, for all intents and purposes, complete, data collected, analyzed, and published, and then briefly a project in waiting that grows out of the first. And in between these two is my sabbatical work that Dean mentioned that I started in 2007 and just finished data collection for in June, right before I left, and packed the Subaru and came here. Which is following the cohorts of massage therapy. But that's perhaps a topic for another day. But I would like to say that there are three themes that co-join all of them, and these themes are as follows. A methodology that is ethnographic and comparative, what Louis Wacquant would call observant participation rather than participant observation, because it actually deploys the body of the researcher, as a vector of knowledge. There's a focus on community as inextricably linked to body projects, but community building is an outgrowth of only a particular set of these. And third, gatherings of bodies that are largely female. So that's the sort of setup of the context. The term bodywork itself has multiple meanings. It refers both to the work one does on their own body, and that would include the more obvious body projects such as working out, but also to dieting, body modification, from everything as simple as pierced ears to much more sometimes outrageous forms of body modification, and other ways that we imprint personal and cultural preference in corporal ways. It can also refer to therapeutic practices such as massage, performed by laborers in the legal and self-referential category of body workers. My work spans both, but today I'm going to focus on the former. Now, I drew you in with a title that refers to Robert Putnam's critically acclaimed social research on the purported decline of civil society and democratic participation in the United States at the turn of the 21st century. And with that decline, the social capital accumulated in largely voluntary associations. And in his seminal 1995 article, Bowling Alone, America's Declining Social Capital, and its elaboration in his 2001 book, same title, different subtitle, Putnam presents data on the fairly rapid decline of organizational memberships, particularly voluntary association memberships, from labor unions to the PTA, to the fraternal and sororal associations that were the hallmark of the early to mid-20th century, and of course, of league bowlers. Putnam's, and I quote, most whimsical and discomforting bit of evidence of disengagement in contemporary America was that while absolute numbers of bowlers increased between 1980 and 1993, league bowling declined by 40%. Mass memberships organizations such as the Sierra Club and NOW, he claims, are tertiary associations. Members are bound together by common symbols, leaders, perhaps ideals, but not to each other. In short, as social capital, the stock which built the American dream by way of building networks, norms, and social trust declines, so declines the positive results it produces: economic development, lower crime, more effective government, better schools, even personal health and well-being. Of course, many of the social forces that produce modernity itself contribute to the decline in civic engagement as their manifestations converge in the late 20th century. And perhaps we can talk about that a little bit more further along in our conversation. A critique of Putnam, though, that piqued my interest was articulated by Michael Schudson in his 1996 article, "What if civic life didn't die?" What Schudson asks is, what if new configurations of social service activities are replacing the more traditional forms of social service and voluntary association that Putnam analyzes in his data? And he's using GSS data sets primarily, others as well. And of course, for those of us who are engaged in the conversation around blessed unrest, we might suggest that Paul Hawken could have a nice conversation with Putnam about community building. But Schudson also asks, can we perhaps even look at phenomena sort of that we wouldn't perhaps think of, like growth in memberships in family fitness centers, as evidence that civic life is taking new forms of expression? Now, I have to say I was not specifically focused on either Putnam or Schudson when I joined Curves for Women in 2005. Only on getting in shape to withstand what I presume to be the ravages of a total hip replacement that was scheduled for the summer of 2006. But my experience in the organization led to a study, the results of which were published in the March 2009 issue of Qualitative Sociology, and the article, "McDonald's at the Gym, A Tale of Two Curves." Now, I'm not going to focus as much on the McDonald's piece, but it'll sort of creep its way in here. But Curves for Women, how many people are familiar with Curves for Women, the phenomenon? And it certainly is a phenomenon. It's been a niche leader in women's fitness since the late 1990s, about the time that this whole conversation about decline in social capital is at its fore. Curves International, at the time of writing, I actually know that it's in a bit of a tailspin right now, but at the time that I wrote the article, was in fact the largest fitness franchise in the world. And it's focused simultaneous on the sort of culturally defined fitness needs of women as women, and addressing those needs in a fully rationalized manner, right, that's consistent with contemporary lifestyles and women's dual and time-consuming roles as worker and family caretakers. Now, Curves promotes itself as the first fitness and weight loss facility dedicated to providing affordable, one-stop exercise and nutritional information for women. And the primary product, although you can now find multiple sort of Curves food products on your grocery shelves, is a 30-minute workout routine. And this workout routine is completed on 8 squares, right, in a circuit, with 12 machines, 8 sort of stations between them. And just more now? Ooh, I've been back for a few years. Not since the hip surgery. Yeah. Yeah, but anyway, it's designed to accomplish both aerobic exercise and strength training for every muscle group in 30 minutes. And there's been extensive research conducted at Baylor University to prove its efficacy. Right? It's designed, though, to be fast, fun, and safe. So it's a fully rationalized, I mean, it's sort of, there's definitely a sort of scientific management component in all of this. Fully rationalized workout routine. The circuit is taught to women by women, although the founder is a man, and promises both weight and inch loss when practiced at least 3 times per week in conjunction with a healthy diet. And a central strategy, though, if you look at the Curves literature, is to offer this 30-minute fitness and common sense weight loss program with the support of a community of women. Right? And so the community piece is something that is very clearly embedded in the literature and in the concept. The Curves comfort zone is typically situated within a no-frills 1,000 to 2,000 square foot, what Canfield in 2004 called the anti-gym, ostensibly for women whose self-images render them gym averse. So this is not a gym experience for you know, your Right. So it's clear that the rationalized premise of curves, although it's based on the scientific evidence and best fitness practices, or at least it's clear to me, that this suggests a monolithic client, someone who's fully invested in and subordinated to that sort of methodical rationalization of lifestyle that Max Weber first predicted, and that was substantiated by the sociologist George Ritzer in his now classic text, The McDonaldization of Society. And I have to say that the promise of a quick, routinized method of integrating exercise into an overscheduled life was what attracted me to the organization, and not sociology at all. I actually had overheard some colleagues talking about it, and I won my membership at an auction at Roanoke College at the Red Dinner in February, and was thrilled. So my relationship with the organization began in March of 2005 at a site that I will call Smalltown Curves. And I maintained an apartment in Smalltown. It was close to the last place that I worked, about 100 miles from my permanent residence. By the summer, however, I was not in my apartment, and I was doing circuits full-time at a different franchise that I will call South City Curves. Larger community, more diverse in a number of ways, more highly educated folk. So a different community context. And so through an arrangement between the two facilities, I worked out for 3 months in South City. And I have to say, it didn't take long after I started working out at the second facility for my fitness concerns to be sort of subordinated to my sociological curiosity. I worked out 3 times per week consistently for 6 months before really coming to the terms of the fact that I was subconsciously, increasingly consciously sociologizing my experience. During those months, I really began to tone up, and I was certainly happy about that. But as soon as I switched franchises, I began to realize how much I missed the other one, and how much my experiences in the two clubs elicited very different emotional responses, including whether or not I even wanted to go and work out. So beyond the fact that, curves in general contributed to my sense of increased personal well-being vis-a-vis my fitness concerns, there was something missing. And as a member then who also happens to be a sociologist, I started asking questions about the compatibility of this rationalized curves model with that other piece of the marketing strategy, right, the supportive community. And to wit, might the very process of rationalizing and speeding up exercise undermine itself because the quality of the experience doesn't fulfill the bodily needs, the holistic bodily needs, right, of at least some of the participants. And could it be that the system itself is actually subverted in certain locales? And if so, what processes might provoke this subversion? So what I decided to do was go to the managers of both of the franchises with an idea that I would do systematic research. I would be a sort of member with a mission, and they would get the benefits of having a sort of a conversation throughout the process of the differences. And they jumped on it. They were very excited about it. And so I developed a triangulated model of ethnographic methods. I included 40 hours of field research in each of the settings, and that's beyond that first 6 months of sort of observation. Interviews with curve staffs, and then comparison of both of the facilities' official data on the side. The interviews, which included interviews with the owner-operator of each and a manager and at least one staff member who'd been there for a couple of years, included questions about their motivation to work in the club, the specific club practices in relation to maintaining the integrity of the routine, the nature of interventions with clients, when do you force them to weigh in, for example. And the small town curves was not computerized, and so those women never weighed in. They didn't weigh in, they didn't finish, they were going for a different reason. So we discussed the sort of the nature of their interventions and also the client-staff interrelationships beyond just the workout, if they exist, and the extent to which the franchise mission and activities cohere with those of Curves International. Now, just a brief word about setting, and I have in the article a whole sort of elaborate description of the different places. But when I first joined Smalltown Curves, it occupied one storefront, approximately 1,700 square feet. The circuit was sort of oblong, and what am I trying to say? It was an oval, and it occupied most of the space in the main room. The machines, the recovery squares on the long sides, no more than 8 feet across from each other. And so people were really sort of with each other. By November 2005, though, the club was undergoing renovations, including taking over the storefront next door. The new space is 3,000 square feet. And they changed a lot about it. And if you know anything about Curves, it was all sort of lavender, walls lavender. The motif was very consistent. You could go into any Curves and it would look pretty much the way every other Curves looked. Well, this new larger space was painted bright yellow, white trim. They expanded the circuit. They built a seminar room. And the seminar room now housed what was certainly another sort of taboo for most Curves, a coffee stand, wicker furniture, glass top table, in short, a gathering room for women that I learned later had actually been established by the women themselves. There was a smaller room that had been set aside just for stretching. In short, a very uncurves-like set of changes. The most consistent defining characteristic of Smalltown Curves is the interactive energy in that club. And I'll call it interactive energy to distinguish it from energy produced, for example, by, if you've ever been into a Curves, I wish I could reproduce it here, the very loud and ubiquitous aerobic-paced music. It took me a while actually to figure out that the Fleetwood Mac songs that I was listening to were like that time and a half. I was like, wait a minute. Everything from country to hard rock to Broadway, right? It's just like pumping away, and there's a sort of a cheerful tape voice that repeats every 30 seconds, change stations now. And so then people just move around and just go from station to station. So that the energy was over and above what was produced by the actual Curves model. Now, there are daily fluctuations there in regard to the number of women who exercise at various times, but it was a rare visit, and I went at different times of the day to each of these places, that was devoid of joking, laughing, complaining about the machines, conversation about everything from family problems and milestones to religion and politics, which means you're not paying a whole lot of attention to exercise, or even how fast you're moving around the circuit, or if you're taking your pulse, right? Both the manager and her assistant noted the existence of 4 high attendance times, all characterized by clearly defined and tight-knit groups. The assistant manager suggested that most of the women who came to that Curves came to interact. Only a very few didn't. The manager believed that as many as half the clients actually came to the club looking for socialization, not for physical fitness. And of course, just building a community of women. And she said, and I quote, "I'd like to say that it's all health and health related, and I think it starts out that way, but I think human nature, I've done some observation over the last 7 or 8 years, they get tired of the same thing day in and out. So what brings them in here is their friends, and maybe the book club, or there's a speaker coming, or to join the Relay for Life team." Now, I don't know if you're hearing what she just said, but we're not talking 30 minutes in and out now. We're talking about a wide array of activities. And this is pretty much illegal. All 3 women I interviewed agreed that the women who join Curves have no interest, at least their Curves, have no interest in joining a traditional gym, where most of the clients are already fit, where there's little assistance, where there's little privacy from men, and where no one cares about them. And the operative word there is cares. For the first several months, I primarily worked out between 7 and 8, and this is before I actually got into the research piece, where a core group of 8 to 12 women who I'll call the morning ladies work out almost every day. Some of them before work, others who aren't in the labor force just before getting along with whatever it is they're doing. And new members typically intrude on their world, and I was certainly one of them. Their dominance of the circuit and the definition of the atmosphere really sets the tone for the entire club. For any given day, that's it. These women are always there. They complete spotty routines. They adjourn to the back of the room for coffee. Before they're done, they'll just sort of get up and walk off. They never stretch out. through my interviews, as I said, I learned that they bought, not the franchise, bought all the equipment and set up a coffee stand in the back. And they're responsible for maintaining the whole area as well. Now, as a newcomer, the morning ladies were very friendly to me, although I have to tell you, I came in there and I was going to work out. I was just going to have none of the conversation around. And I'm sure I projected that. And I usually would walk in and I would start on sort of a machine where nobody was close, because I knew that then I could sort of get moving around and I wouldn't have to sort of wait. But I also wouldn't have to be rude and ask somebody to move. And so, even though I certainly was, very individualistic, focused on myself, that didn't really last for long. They certainly looked out for each other, and eventually they looked out for me. Very early on, I noticed that when one regular didn't come for weeks, everyone began to ask about it, to the extent that the assistant manager called to check up. Within the first months I was there, they'd planned a birthday party for one of the staff members, organized and managed a silent auction for the American Cancer Society. Now, these are not Curves sanctioned fundraisers. The Curves has a set of sanctioned fundraisers that you can be involved in. They also volunteered to march shopping carts filled with donated food items through the town to the local food pantry. So there was a little train of Curves ladies in their shopping carts. When I came back in late August after my summer in South City, more than one of the morning ladies asked me where I had been. And I really didn't feel as much a sort of member of the community as apparently they thought that I had been. As the manager observed, and I quote, "The morning group, they're always out here laughing and carrying on. A couple of years after they were here, I asked, how long have you known each other? And they said, as long as we've been at Curves. And I thought they were friends before they came in here. It just kind of took me aback. And frankly, until I heard that, I had operated on the very same assumption, given that it's a fairly small town, and because of the quality of their interactions with each other. So it's clear to me that when I began to interview the staff, that their own orientations toward caring and community building help facilitate the network of support at this club. They're committed to the Curves system. I mean, none of them would say that they aren't. But they are also reticent to intervene on the circuit, except in cases of clear danger to someone's health, or in the case of training new members. And in fact, the manager at one point said, sometimes I use a new member as sort of an opportunity to sort of try to get them motivated to sort of weigh in and sort of get with the program. And so there's a sort of intrusive training going on so that everybody sort of gets to the program. In the end, she admits, though, there is a lax adherence to many of the strictures of the corporate model at their site. Yet, she claimed that the sheer presence of women who otherwise wouldn't be exercising was, for her, enough motivation to keep doing what they were doing. And, in fact, they were getting some level of physical activity 4 to sometimes 6 days a week. And that would be bound to have some effect. And she speculated that the social experience could be as important to their well-being as the machines. Quote, "It's mind, body, and soul. Who's to say what's going to make a person healthy?" The two on-site staff members' discourse was replete with the rhetoric of caring a community, both building community in the club and contributing to the community outside of it. As the young assistant manager told me, "I'll tell you one thing these women come out in droves for, and that's when someone is in need, the needy families, or if we're having something like that. Oh dear, the support is tremendous." Implicit in her statement is the acknowledgement that personal fitness goals were not the primary motivation for many of the club's members. And when I went to work out the Wednesday evening following our interview, I noticed a new fundraiser. People were asked to purchase a chance to win a Curves t-shirt to help them defray the costs of cancer treatment for a local man. And although obviously brand new and not officially sanctioned, the container was already overflowing. When asked to compare the level of community in Smalltown Curves to other sites she had visited, the manager said, "I love my club. I've been to other clubs, and that community spirit is just not there." The assistant manager shared a story that to me conveys the depth of the bond among the members. Quote, "We had a lady who came in a couple weeks ago, and she just lost a good friend, and she said, 'I knew I could come here,' and it's the first place she came when her friend passed away. And when we're hit with something like that, it's like, wow, this is much more sometimes than we see. And so she came back in here, and the ladies that were already back here having coffee, they brought her right in, and they cried with her, and they let her get out some of her pain." Now, the major event that spring was a baby shower for that assistant manager who was due to deliver her first child in May. Sign-up sheets for what was to be a potluck of healthy food were posted on the seminar and coffee room window three weeks in advance. 1 week before the shower, one of the morning ladies who originally thought she couldn't attend was thrilled while she was exercising to find out the date was not in conflict with another obligation. And she was like, yes, right? And she's like, oh. It's pretty amazing, just clenching with excitement. Now, I was unable to attend the event. I also had an obligation. I think it was probably a sociology conference, but I was given a full account the following Monday morning. 75 women had shown up for the shower, overflowing from the seminar room and filling the entire setting to capacity. 2 van loads of gifts were packed up after the shower. Now, this level of support clearly identifies them more as a community for the young family than as clients. One final observation. Several weeks later, I was in the stretching room with one of the regular morning ladies who was complaining about her weight. I've gained 30 pounds, she told me. Since when, I asked, because she really didn't look like she had changed to me since I'd been at the club. She said, oh, over the last 3 years, walking is the only thing that works for me, she said. She began to move out of the room. This is just a perk. So following the analysis of Roberta Sassatelli, it's the affective dimension of this club that's a primary motivation for membership and for retention, and that any gym or any fitness facility really needs to do both affective and instrumental work with clients. 30 minutes in and out is not the draw for the morning ladies and their compadres at Smalltown Curves. Now let me tell you a little bit about South City, and I'm going to try to keep it short from here on in. South City is a shining star club, and a shining star club indicates an elite club that really adheres to all of the organizational mandates. They go to conference, they retrain their members, they make sure their machines are maintained regularly, they do everything right. At the time of my research, the physical space at South City was approximately 2,300 square feet, very large central circuit, lavender, everything in one room, very small sort of table and chairs, clearly just for intake, not for hanging out. The original club was 1,100 square feet, I learned, and when the lease for the adjacent store had come up in October 2004, the owners took it over and renovated to expand. So they were doing very well. So it's a very different place, both physically and also culturally. There's still pairs of women who work out together, more so during lunchtime than about any other time of the day. And there is an atmosphere of friendliness in the club. Members are acknowledged by staff coming in and out. Women interact with common courtesy on the circuit. When I asked the manager to describe the club as a workplace, she said, it's very energetic, the energy from people on the circuit, the energy from the people coming in and wanting to learn about the program, who are excited about finding something that can finally help them, the energy from the music that's always playing. It's just a happy place to be. Well, my perception of the tone and energy level at this club is a little less amenable to hers. It seemed to me to be a lot more variable and modified by the individuals on the circuit rather than a culture or a concept that might be attributed to something larger than the individuals themselves. The effervescence of specific personalities or certain staff members' interventions sporadically sort of lifts the collective spirits of women present. For example, one of the few African-American women members of this club, typically exercising in the late afternoon, was one of the few women who was, really interested in or able to raise the energy level on the circuit. And she would come in and she would call out to other women and she'd sing along with the music, and she just really had the capacity to sort of make the club, and, which is otherwise sort of very private, women doing their private exercise, really loosen up during her 30 minutes there. And then she'd be gone, and it would go back. The energy level just would decrease appreciably when she was gone. In my field notes, I wrote that some of the white women who exercise with her seem to be put off by her ability to alter the environment. She takes up more space than her station allows. She fills the room. Similarly, one of the younger part-time workers who was about to graduate from a local college was careful to engage women on the circuit with sort of personal chat rather than the solely fitness-related conversation that was the case for other people. Sometimes she would even work out with people on the circuit and chatted with them when they moved from station to station. Conversely, though, the extent of the individualistic focus of the members at South City can be demonstrated by another more common observation that I made at the club. And this one was around 11 a.m. before lunch. And so we didn't have a big crowd there when working women come in to do their workouts, perhaps about a half an hour to 45 minutes later. There were 8 older women on the circuit. A young part-time worker was behind the counter, and one of the longtime staff members was working with a particular woman on one of the machines. There wasn't any interaction beyond that. The women sort of did their routines joylessly, even though the music was as loud and upbeat as ever. No eye contact, and I was really struck by the extent to which they resembled sort of automatons. And this is the same demographic of women who had been hugging and howling with each other in Smalltown. One staff member, the longest-term employee of the club, who I'll call Helen, was particularly well known for intervening as the women worked out. And boy, people would hate it when they came in and she was there. And because usually she was critiquing a position or their use of the equipment and just basically telling them they were doing it wrong. And occasionally she would ask women on the circuit to sort of cheer for someone who'd just come in and been weighed, and she lost weight or inches, and we'd all just cheer. And then we'd go back to the machines. Generally, however, when either Helen or the owner-operator was present, the focus was on the routine, and only the routine. One day, an older woman who observed me sitting at one of the small tables waiting to talk to the manager spotted me, and she was picking up her belongings to leave. And we smiled at each other, and she said, "This really does me in. And sometimes it's really boring. Helen is so persnickety unless you do all of that." So the ubiquitous focus on precision and efficiency of the workout, moving folks along so the integrity of the rationalized routine is preserved, is clearly not always fun. When I asked the manager whether the women at South City look forward to interaction with other women, she replied, "Well, some of them do. Some of them come in with friends. They come in as a group, and support each other outside of the club. Lunch people usually come in together. We once had a mother, her 2 daughters, and the grandmother. From my observation, however, it appears that most of the women in this club who did socialize with others on the circuit had pre-existing relationships outside of the club. So for these women, working out was just a good way to coordinate some extra time spent together." When I asked the owner whether she thought members look forward to interacting with other women, she answered this way: "Absolutely, and that's where we have to watch it doesn't turn into a social club." That it's chat, 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 and they're not focused on their workout. So the owner's insistence on a strict adherence to the corporate regulations really did set the tone for the club. No stories of outreach among women who didn't know each other prior to joining the club were shared by any of the women that I interviewed from the franchise, nor did I observe any mechanisms for building relationships at this club beyond seeking and acknowledging familiar faces during the half hour, which I would do myself 3 times per week, as specified by the Curves system. The mantra of fast, fun, and safe, within a total commitment to the system, drives the management strategy at South City. So the need to apply the sort of curve-specific principle and to keep that shining star elite status was really a defining effect of the club, and I would say a defining effect on how the club is experienced by members. To subvert the system, according to the owner-operator, would be dangerous for retention. Quote, "It's 30 minutes. You're in and out in 30 minutes. And if you're hanging around and chatting, and now it's 45 minutes, and then an hour, and pretty soon that's your perception, that every time I go to Curves, it takes me an hour, and now all of a sudden, I don't have an hour in my day that I can devote to Curves." End of quote. Now, the owner did deploy the rhetoric of community in her description of the product and the sort of culture that Curves is committed to creating among its members. But as Helen mused at the end of our interview, quote, "I went to the Curves in Jebsboro, which is a small rural border town. Everybody knows everybody. It's a small circuit. It felt good in there. They weren't doing it right, but as we're talking, I can see there's much more room for community at this club. We were doing it good at first when we were small." I'm not sure that it's about size. All 3 of the women I interviewed in South City are dedicated professionals with the same passion for their work as the women in Smalltown. Enforcement of the routine in conjunction with the cultural dynamics of the larger community might have an interactive effect in defining the organizational cultures, but my research wasn't designed to tease that out. A note on demographics. The average age of the membership at Smalltown Curves is about 50 years old, but there are women in most age groups, ranging from teenagers to 80 years old, who actually work in that club. The club had 469 members at the close of 2005, an increase of 60 members from the previous year. Among that number were 324 new members, and there had been over 260 that canceled their memberships. And the manager conducted a survey. She wanted to know what was going on, why they weren't renewing. The primary reasons that former members gave were loss of interest in exercising, moving on to more rigorous programs, so clearly it's not for everyone, or getting a family membership in the Y, or financial reasons. Given that they weren't computerized, all of the data on weight and inch loss, which is one of the things I was trying to compare, was recorded by my student assistant who was given access to individual paper files at the facility. And about halfway through, we just gave it up. The records were so sporadic and there was so little enforcement of that, because nobody really cared except for a few people whether or not they were really losing weight. So we couldn't make any corresponding comparisons to South City. South City had 715 members at the close of 2005, and that compares with the 919 members they had in December of 2004. 3/4 of the members there are between the ages of 40 and 69. As I said, more racial diversity in this club, but white women still constitute the majority of members. During the 1-year period in the aggregate, those women lost a total of 4,290 pounds and 6,574 inches, a whopping 10,864 units of better health. I learned recently, however, from a South City member that attrition has recently compelled the owners to compress back to the original 1,100 square foot storefront. Now, the most compelling finding of this research ultimately poses a dilemma for Curves International, and I think is instructive for conversation about community building. Both of the franchises I studied might be considered successful, but in different ways. While it seems evident from the research that this 30-minute workout must be performed in all of its standardized and scientifically managed detail for an efficacious result for an individual body, building community takes time. The organizational culture of Smalltown Curves, nestled as it is in a town with no strangers, might predict the formation of primary relationships among clients, but maybe not. Maybe it's more about affective needs of members, as equally salient to the folks who are running, but also members' own resistance to the McDonaldization that I observed at the other club. Despite the perception by at least one staff member that the South City Club shows the promise of providing a supportive community, my data and my experience suggest an organizational culture more oriented toward being exemplary in rationalized practice than as a social club. They want clients to have fun, but the orientation is toward individualized and rationalized fitness. Affective needs are secondary to procedural concerns. Now, in Smalltown, the owner claims they're practicing 95% curves, but the organizational culture, framed as it is in both a service orientation and commitment to client integration, results in less persistence in enforcing the rules of the system. And the club's resistance can be observed in the non-alignment of its decor, both in terms of the style, the incorporation of a seminar room, deliberately for book clubs and guest speakers. Membership extends beyond 30 minutes 3 times a week. Smalltown Curves staff also resist McDonaldization by facilitating relationships through providing the time-consuming programs, including the seminar series, a men's night program during Valentine's Week, spontaneous extracurricular activity, the baby shower, frequent fundraisers organized by the morning ladies in the back room. But its success in attracting and retaining clients is difficult to refute. So the divergence between the Curves method and the organizational culture is paying off in terms of a growing membership, a clearly defined culture of community, and that also means that staff's clearly putting in time over and above their normal shifts as well, and not complaining about it. So Smalltown Curves is more consistent with what Jeremy Rifkin calls an empathetic time world, an orientation toward integrating selves back into the temporal bonds of larger communities of life. And my observations suggest also that substantive rationality, the significance of value rational action over instrumental concerns, also might operate to subvert McDonaldization within the Curve system. Both the members and the staff at Smalltown conflate fitness and general health concerns. Membership for regulars is predicated on spending time well in excess of 30 minutes in exercise and in the sort of community activity that sustains relationships and staves off culturally induced alienation. So being the McDonald's of fitness is the primary goal of Curves International, but there's also a claim of providing a supportive community. Building and maintaining community, however, is time-consuming, and it's antithetical to the methodology of McDonaldization generally and to Curves specifically. If it's presumed that women won't continue memberships if they spend too much time at the facility, I would suggest they need to spend more time looking at Smalltown Curves. In regard to Curves as a locus of satisfying both individualized needs and the functions of community, I think that there's really some wonderful future ethnographic and epidemiological research that can be done out there among members, staff, facilities, and Curves all over the Curves network, and especially during this period of economic downturn. I actually was following up some information that I had. Fully 20% of the Curves franchises in Massachusetts have failed over the last several years. So I mean, there is something going on. And I actually went and I looked at some blogging that was going on, and there are lots of angry members, and many of them attributing their own failures to Curves moving out into the nutrition and health food business, and even perhaps over territorializing. But there was one in there that said, well, mine is small, but it's doing great. We have a lot of fun there. We're doing such wonderful things. And it was sort of like, the aha moment. So there are certainly more women out there who are likely to resist that rigid structure. And so we need to ask lots of questions about individual values, lifestyles. Do people with different orientations to community interaction select different sorts of facilities, different times of day? Or perhaps leave if there's no conscious community building. And of equal importance is the understanding of the relative significance of community engagement and perhaps the accumulation of targeted social capital, or at the very least, satisfaction of affective desires to the experience of good health. And toward that end, my future research, just a minute on it, is focused on conducting more research, this time focus groups and interviews with women on the roster of the Wet Hens and a Few Chicks. And the Wet Hens and a Few Chicks are a fibromyalgia exercise class that I joined when I was on sabbatical in the fall of 2007. Unlike other swim classes at a local YMCA, the Wet Hens evolved into a supportive group of actually dues-paying women. Everybody paid dues, and the occasional rooster would show up. Many of these folks semi-retired, retired, but ranging in age from the 30s into the late 70s, who maintain community bonds wherever they are, whether they participate in the 3 times a week classes, live 14 hours away, or in the case of one member across the Atlantic Ocean in Spain. Monthly lunches, fundraisers for scholarships for underprivileged youth, support in the form of cards, flowers, and foods after surgeries or when there's a loss of a family member's, shared advice for members who experience fibro flares that keep them out of class for months on end, are just a few of the ways in which this community has been built and maintained for now over 5 years. While the Hens aren't involved in social networking yet, email maintains some level of connectivity for members like me who still self-identify as members of the community even as a distance. There are plenty of swimming classes characterized by cordial relationships at the Y. The Wet Hens community, at least from my bodily experience, transcends age, race, and physical ability to actually maintain membership in the class itself. In fact, the call went out over email just this week for suggestions about pain management for a new member experiencing some very great difficulties. Many will respond. In fact, my working hypothesis is that in a time characterized by longer life expectancies, social speed up, stress-induced illness, and the decline of many of the traditional sites where women traditionally built community in the past, for example, the Women's Clubs of America, traditional caretakers and women balancing paid and domestic work are building community around self-care outside of the confines of the private sphere and indeed the public sphere of work. So has community building in the fitness center replaced bowling in the Friday night league? I'll open the question up to you. Thanks for your attention.